In Karachi today, some 3,000 Pakistanis protested against the United States and burned President George W. Bush in effigy. I'm joined now by ABC News correspondent Bob Woodruff in the Pakistani capital of Islamabad. Bob, what exactly is it they are protesting? I mean, in terms of the last week's events, it's the United States that is the injured party.
Well, they're protesting the government's decision to side, the government of Pakistan's decision to side with the United States in a potential attack on Afghanistan. For the most part, the people that are protesting are religious fundamentalists in this country. Their brethren are the Taliban, and they're also Muslims. And they don't want the United States to come in and attack that country, and they certainly don't want their own government to help the United States to do that.
How significant a force are they, Bob?
They're a fairly significant force, especially in the areas near Afghanistan, Ted. There's, in the northwest frontier province, there are a lot of former Afghanis up there. They generally side with Afghanistan. There is a great deal of worry within the Pakistan government itself that if there are problems within the country, they could be very, very significant.
There was a Pakistani delegation that went to Kabul, to the Afghan capital. I understand they're back. Do you know anything about what they achieved or failed to achieve?
It's hard to tell. They came back after 2 days of spending with the Taliban, trying to convince them to turn over Osama bin Laden. They have now returned. We had originally thought they were going to stay another day and participate or watch this council of clerics that's going on in Kabul today. What that will be is a group of Taliban's religious scholars that will now make the decision, one, about what to do with Osama bin Laden, whether or not to extradite him, and two, whether or not to declare a jihad or holy war against the West in case of an attack. In the case of the Osama bin Laden decision, most people believe that if they decide to extradite Osama bin Laden, they will probably put some conditions on that. One, that he go to an Islamic country so that he could be tried in an Islamic court. There's very little likelihood, they say, that they will allow him to be extradited to a Western judicial system.
Is there any doubt in your mind at all, Bob, that the Pakistani government has made the decision that, at least in this issue, they stand with the United States and do so foursquare?
No doubt about it. They seem to have already put their cards in that direction right now. In fact, the president, General Pervez Musharraf, has spent the last couple of days on a sales mission around the country. He's met with very influential editors of newspapers, political parties, religious leaders to try to convince them that this is the right path for Pakistan, and he will be addressing the nation tonight. It is now Wednesday morning here in Pakistan, so on Wednesday night he will be addressing the nation, and we believe he will probably continue along the same line of trying to convince the Pakistanis that he's going in the right direction and siding with the United States. There may be some relief of debt that will be coming this way to Pakistan, and certainly he wants to be on the record as being on the side of anti-terrorism.
Bob Woodruff, thanks very much. And joining me now live, Mansoor Ijaz. He is an American citizen of Pakistani descent. He is a businessman who has repeatedly served as an intermediary between the United States and various Muslim regimes, including Afghanistan. He joins us now from our New York studios. And Mr. Ijaz, let's pick up on the note that I was just discussing with Bob Woodruff. You were telling me before, when we were on the phone, that you think there are massive demonstrations coming up on Friday, and I'd like you to talk both about the scope and what you think the impact of those demonstrations will be.
I think there's going to be a fairly significant show of force by the religious parties throughout Pakistan. The intent, I think, they have is to demonstrate not to their own government what it is that could go wrong if the United States were to launch military strikes from Pakistan into Afghanistan, but to really send a message to the American people that if you think you can come here and destabilize our part of the world, we can destabilize things that matter to you as well. And to us, at this moment, the Musharraf government matters quite a bit. Now, in terms of scope, let's keep in mind that Pakistan is a nation of 140 million people. Many of those people live in the urban city centers, Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, some of the other big cities there. And I think the religious parties have enormous capacity to bring people out into the streets. Now, it may be possible for them to bring out as many as 500,000 or 1 million people just to sort of demonstrate what the riot value is. And this is something that I think would be of great concern both here in Washington and in Islamabad, because the fundamental issue that General Musharraf has to worry about is at what point does he call his own army out into the streets to quell the riots caused by his own people.
And you were talking also then about the lower ranks of the army being perhaps very sympathetic with the demonstrators.
Exactly. Let's keep in mind that most of these younger army enlisted men are part of the network of madrasa schools, these radical religious schools, where they were schooled right alongside the people that they would essentially be telling to go home.
Is it too dramatic to talk about the possibility of civil war in Pakistan over this issue?
It is not. I'm afraid that's a very, very serious concern.
All right, on that note, let's take a short break. More with Mr. Ijaz in a moment. And joining me live once again from New York, Pakistani-American businessman Mansoor Ijaz. Your reputation, Mr. Ijaz, is that you are a resourceful gatherer of information. What kind of information do you have on the Pakistani delegation that just came back from Afghanistan? How'd they do?
Well, they certainly delivered the message that that I think they needed to. Let's keep in mind that the people that went to Afghanistan were the intelligence chief of Pakistan and his deputy director, who is in charge of essentially their jihad policy, if I may put it that way, the holy war policy.
In other words, he's very sympathetic with the Taliban.
Exactly. And it's also important for the American people to understand that the ISI has historically been the greatest supporter of the Taliban. In fact, many people think that the ISI is the sole supporter of the Taliban. And if there was anyone in the world that could persuade them to come to their senses and understand what had gone wrong here, it was the ISI chief. Now, it was a stroke of luck for us as Americans that he was here in Washington so he could be directly debriefed by the American CIA director and the White House before he went back to Pakistan to carry the message. Now, having come back, I think the message that they delivered was one that said, essentially this time, whatever has happened and whoever is responsible, this has gone too far. And it runs the risk of doing enormous damage to Pakistan as a country as well. And no intelligence chief of Pakistan could damage his own country's interest above the Taliban. Whether he got a reception or not to that, I think it is pretty clear to me that he could have been told flat no, and that is not what he got. He got a scaled response, which means that the Taliban understand that this is pretty serious what has happened here, and that scaled response has three components to it. The first is that the Taliban have said that if they are to turn bin Laden over, it will have to be done by the Council of Elders. So the leader of the Taliban, Mullah Omar, has taken that decision out of his own hands. The second is that they have insisted that the Organization of Islamic Conference, which is an umbrella group of all kinds of different Islamic organizations and countries from all over the world, all the way from the left to the right, that they would have to sign off on this as well. And then finally, that they have to have an Islamic jurist to sit in for the trial that would take place thereafter.
Forgive me for interrupting you. It sounds to me as though this is just so much, not necessarily time wasting from their point of view, but a clear effort to say we can keep stringing this thing along and stringing it along. I don't get the impression that the American government is that patient right now. You were implying to me when we spoke earlier this evening that there may be one last chance for one last mission, perhaps even including an American envoy?
I think it's very important for the United States to demonstrate every route, every mechanism, every possibility of fairness. That they've given ample opportunity for the Taliban to respond. They've given them a very clear direction on what it is that we want. And first we asked the people who were closest to them, and if they're not going to respond to them, we're happy to ask them ourselves, because the Afghans can be very stubborn people. And if they don't respond then it's very clear, and I think the world would then stand behind us united, including many of the Islamic countries.
Are you telling me that the Taliban would accept an American delegation?
I think they have to.
And is it your sense that the United States has the patience at this point, that the Bush administration, the White House has the patience at this point to say, sure, we're willing to send a delegate?
I think the response of the Bush White House has to be a thoughtful, very carefully planned operation.
Actually, I'm not asking you what you think they ought to do. I'm asking you what you think they will do.
Well, again, I'm saying that I think what they will end up doing in the end is a surgical operation and not one that is a carpet bombing raid.
But between now and then, do you think it is possible that this White House will still send a delegate to Afghanistan to meet with the Taliban leadership?
They have indicated that they are prepared to send a high-level delegation of officials. The question is whether the officials are the right people to sit with them. I think that's the way I would put it.
Who do you think would be the right people?
I think they have to send someone who has stature, perhaps from the intelligence community, someone who is truly an American that nobody could question. I think they have to send somebody who has a very clear understanding of what the roadmap is in Afghanistan right now.
And finally, and we've only got 30 seconds, what are your expectations for Friday in Pakistan? Real trouble?
I think there's going to be enough heat applied in Pakistan on Friday to help General Musharraf understand what the ramifications are of going with America, and I think there will be enough heat applied for America to understand what the risks are to that government if things go wrong.
I thank you very much. Good of you to join us this evening.
Thank you.
When we come back, an American lawyer who has unique insights into the mindset of the terrorists.